And you know, that's a little bit old, that chart.
Did God save President Trump from being assassinated? In a very public assassination attempt, a sniper's bullet aimed at President Trump hit his ear. History would have been completely different if the bullet had landed just a tiny bit to the side, and if Trump hadn't moved his head just before the bullet hit. That's a big coincidence, don't you think? Right after the incident, Trump then said that God had saved his life. He declared that it was God alone who prevented the unthinkable from happening. Some internet memes showing a bloody Trump also said that they are coming for you, but there is one who stands in the way, echoing certain Bible verses. Some even looked for direct signs from the Bible in Trump's wound, saying it was a sign that God was preparing him for a holy mission. The message is clear. Trump's survival was a miracle and proof that God stepped in, and maybe even God's way of showing who should be the next president. This is an example of a story where the supernatural is being used to explain an event that is perceived to be improbable in a way that suits the storyteller's needs. This explanation, of course, omits some aspects of the event. For example, it doesn't consider the fact that the shooter wasn't really a sniper. In fact, according to news reports, he was known to be a bad shot, so bad that he had trouble hitting anything. This explanation also doesn't consider that God could have just made the gun stop working, in which case no one would have been hurt. It is also interesting to think about how we decide what is God's doing and what is the devil's doing. For example, in the witch hunts of the Middle Ages, a suspected witch was thrown into the water in a so-called water trial. If she drowned, she was innocent, but if she survived, she was guilty because she miraculously survived through demonic means. Who invented such an attribution, and why is an interesting academic question, but one thing is clear. Interpreting survival by the hand of God, Satan, or coincidence is sometimes a very difficult choice. One could also consider other things that happened in history. Why did, for example, some other famous leaders survive attempts on their life? Was it just luck, or maybe God or Satan stepping in? And who decides that? Usually, according to those leaders, it was, of course, God, for obvious reasons. And what about other occasions when some famous person dies in a freak accident or in a seemingly improbable way? Are they explained supernaturally? And what about cases in which someone not important is killed or saved in an improbable way? Those persons are rarely awarded supernatural explanations in the public eye. Thus we see that it is interesting and also quite chaotic which explanations are propagated in the public in each case. In addition, when we tell stories, it's also interesting to think about what isn't explained. In the Trump assassination attempt, a man died protecting his family by jumping in front of the bullets. Some other people were badly hurt. But there are no supernatural explanations given for these cases in the news. Just like in movies, the lives of the less important characters and their families aren't explored in an epic way. It's just not that interesting to the story and its main characters. So supernatural explanations are rarely invoked. Humans are the only creatures on Earth who tell stories to explain the big questions of life and existence to themselves and others. How unlikely something seems and how important the person is often determines whether or not one looks for a supernatural explanation. But if the human mind decides that further explanations are needed, then the mind determines which supernatural beings and their supposed reasons and goals are used to explain what happened. It all depends on the available explanatory models in the mind. It's also interesting that when it comes to how important a person is, at least one person is always important to the person explaining it. The explainer himself. What happens to ourselves and our loved ones is much more likely to need an explanation than what happens to a stranger. For example, imagine you are driving and see a deer in the forest. How probable is it that the deer is exactly in that spot at exactly the time you drive by? Not very likely, since every single event is in itself extremely unlikely, just like every single lottery number in itself. But imagine that you actually hit the deer. Then you start to think, how likely was it that the deer was running right in front of my car when it happened? This is because the event suddenly matters to you, and so your mind starts to need explanations. So, what is the truth about the possible motives and actions of supernatural beings on that day? That is a whole other question. We have to separate what we can know based on what happened from what actually happened, supernaturally or naturally. Only one thing is for sure. Supernatural explanations and interpretations will continue to be a big part of American politics. But what do you think about what happened? Do you believe in the supernatural interpretation? If so, why? If not, why not? Let us know in the comments section and subscribe to the channel for more.